maybe a good place to start would be, Luis, if you can talk about um, how much was planned and how was the shooting of Agarrando Pueblo, how much was improvised, what was the interaction among the, how was the collaboration with Carlos in that sense?
Yes, the film is when we made the film, we were not aware really of what the mockumentary was because that term came in fashion, I think, more in the 80s. We just said to ourselves, let's make a fiction film that looks like a documentary. And the film goes full circle because the beginning scenes were all improvised. They were based a little bit on the concept of happening. They were completely improvised. But in some scenes, like in the scene in the water fountain, we had people among the people that were watching the scene. We put two provocateurs to generate a discussion. And then when there's this scene in the hotel, it's completely scripted, but it was improvised many times. At that time, we didn't have like video assist, so we would rehearse with a Portapack video camera until we got the rhythm of the scene, and we would improvise again and again. I think we did that scene about 11 times because we had to stage it so that with the two doors, they come in and come out. It was like a whole choreography. We thought a lot about that scene of Marx Brothers movie where the people keep coming into the room, into the room, into the room. Then after that scene, all the scene in the shack is completely scripted. But of course, Mayolo would improvise a lot. And then at the end, it's completely documentary. The interview with the character is completely documentary. So it goes full circle. It's a film that navigates between fiction and film, and fiction and documentary, I mean.
And it seems like you're making reference maybe more generally or maybe very specifically to certain moments in new Latin American cinema and a kind of critique of representations of poverty and social difference. Was there some?
Yes, the film responds to two different contexts. One is a national context, because at that time there was a film law that said that every American or foreign film should be preceded by a short film, which was obligatory to show it. I mean, and that was supposed to promote national film production. And in a country where there were only like a dozen filmmakers, all of a sudden there were more than 100 filmmakers that profited from this law. And the cheapest way to make money was to make documentaries, usually going out into the street and just shooting scenes of poverty and stuff like that. And then they would put a narrator and a little bit of classical music and a politically correct commentary. But on a wider context, at that time, during the late 60s and the 70s then, there were a proliferation of films coming from the third world or shot in the third world about the subject of poverty, usually with a political agenda. And there was an avidness of the TV channel, European TV channels and European film festivals that wanted films about poverty. Most of these films came from different theaters that were at the time, like the Third Cinema of Solana Sigetino, the Imperfect Cinema of Garcia Espinosa, and so on and so on. So we decided, we thought that many of these films were not very honest in some way, that there was a lot of demagogy involved, and that that's why when we premiered the film in Paris, where I edited the film, we published a short manifesto called ¿Qué es la pornomiseria? What is poverty porn? By pornomiseria, we intended to say that these poverty porn films were similar to porno films. In porno films, sex is used as merchandise, and in pornomiseria, poverty is used as merchandise. And at that time, many of these films got prizes, and it was in fashion, more or less. So this film came out, and it really caused a controversy among filmmakers, and we were accused of making an anarchist film, which it is, because Mayolo and I thought that through provocation we could arrive at to make people reflect or think. Through provocation, one could make the audience think. So it refers to those two contexts.
But I think what it's very scary is when you say this film was made in
77, 40 years
77,
ago.
and I think it's the present still of the third world, no? If you're the third world, you're supposed to be like the big team, the poverty, no, like all sorts of misery, the porno misery, it's still these days, no? If you are from the third world and you have and you're not showing that, it's what it sells. Mm-hmm. Until now. That's why I was so amazed when I saw your film 10 years ago. It was so disturbing to see that we haven't made like another step, no, from there.
Yes, and this
it's very powerful for that, for
this critique that the film does, it can be extended to other forms of artistic creation, you know. I mean, to the visual arts or to art in general. Because it's expected for us to do social films, mm-hmm. or were social characters to be filmed.
And what about the black and white and the color? It's like the Wizard of Oz, but like the film, it's color, that it's more real, and the black and white, it's like the reality, it's on the other level of the reality, through the black and white.
Yes, I think, I'm not sure, but I think the first film that I saw in my life was The Wizard of Oz, and I was amazed about this different, that it used black and white and in color. But in this film, at that time, making of films were not in fashion or were accustomed like it is today. So we decided to make this as a fake making of. So we established that the black and white would be the documentary about the filmmakers, and the color would be what the filmmakers were shooting.
And Ximena, can I ask you to talk a little bit about the last film that we saw? Because it seems like you're suggesting this conflation between, and feel free to contest any of these terms, but a sort of military imperialism on one hand, with the former president of the United States, and then the society of the spectacle, the television, the cinematic apparatus, and cultural imperialism. Can you, am I on the right track here, or?
Yes, yes, absolutely, you're in the right track. Well, Cinepolis, I started making like a film about the cultural invasions, the tiny little, and it's funny because I was seeing that it's 15 years ago, and it was just the beginning of this Mexico where they started making and living in the answering machines, the bilingual messages, no? So it was like the beginning of this to be so visible or palpable, that we were becoming the others, no? Like we having these like cultural invasions. But always in my work, I have something very performative that I react to the everyday, like the immediacy of life, of how it develops. So while I was doing the thing about the invasion of the images of the everyday life, it's when the Iraq war started. So I was very well. Also from the Twin Towers, no, from the 9/11. It was very disturbing that you felt all the time you were in a film, no. So these like boundaries between reality and fiction, where they don't exist anymore, like, I don't know if that happened to all of us. I think so. No, it was like we were watching on TV the terrible scene of the Twin Towers, and everybody felt it was like a film. No, it was like so impossible it was real. So also in my work, always there's like these levels of between no boundaries between fiction and reality. No, so it's like this invasion of the way we have to look, the way we live, and that there's no limits between the one and the other. Mm-hmm. And also like the found footage use for me is like I think any of the arts will respond to our reality, and the landscape of our reality, we can call it reality, the landscape, it's the mediums, los medios, ¿cómo se dice? The media, no? Even it's like, it's completely natural, the same to shoot it myself, or what it's the reference of the already existed media, no?
And well, the film is called Cinépolis, and some people don't know what Cinépolis is. It's a big distribution and exhibition company in Mexico, no? So that has a double meaning, right?
Yes, and yes, it was like more like Metropolis, no, like this place, yeah, where that it's like a movie land, no, where you inhabit a movie land. And it was funny because when I showed it the first time in Mexico City, everybody was looking for Cinépolis is like a big chain of movie theaters in Mexico and distribution, not only Mexico, I think Latin America.
In India.
In India too. And they were like looking for the Cinépolis of the neighborhood, no? Así de, no sé, acá en Polanco había un Cinépolis. But yes, again, it's like the same.
So maybe I can ask both of you about how much it changed since you made these films, 40 years in on one side, and more than 10 years in yours. So how much it changed in terms of the way that the circulation of the image between the empire, if you want so to call it, or the way that the image or the democratization of film or the image works related to films that are made and funded by European institutions or American institutions, how that changed since you both made these films?
Well, as I said, I think Ospina's film is completely
Contemporary.
contemporary, no?
But is there something, yeah.
No, and also I think in a way I would talk more about Luis's film. Um, Also, like the freedom of the small cameras, no? That you see these persons in the documentary with the Bolex. That it's the same liberty that now it's the everyday in life, but it's like a huge journey, because I feel like I'm not a dinosaur, but I'm only 55 and I have seen like the whole change. For instance, in Mexico, on TV, when I started like my career, I don't know, at 20 years old, it was forbidden on TV to say English words, no? And now we are like completely globalized in all the senses, and the media itself, it has changed like, no, like the found footage is the memes. I don't know how you call memes in English.
Memes, right? Memes.
The memes is like the everyday the reinterpretation, recontextualization of the existing subject, no? I don't know what Luis thinks.
With regards to my film, when it came out, it was very much criticized by the critics of the moment, because most of those critics belong to like a how would you say that, like a clique, una cofradía, ¿cómo se diría?
Like a subgroup or
Subgroup, mostly of leftist film critics, and it came under a lot of attack, and we had very disagreeable experiences at film festivals at that time. But 30 years later, the film had like a revival, and it acquired like a second life, and it's always shown in the context of the ethics of filming the other. You know? It's a film that questions the ethics of filmmaking itself, because the filmmaking in a way is a way of vampirization of your subject, you know. Film has this tendency of turning the subject into an object sometimes, and it depends on the honesty of the filmmaker. For example, to let yourself be filmed is one of the greatest acts of generosity that a person can make. And I think the filmmaker has an obligation to be honest with that person. For example, with this film, 9 years after I made it, I bumped into one of the characters of the film, and he hadn't seen the film, so I invited him to my house and decided to make a documentary in one day about him watching the film and what that provoked with him. I always wonder what happens to my subjects after I stop filming, and that's not the case of many filmmakers. Some filmmakers use their actors or their subjects sometimes. For example, it's very well known that in Clockwork Orange, Kubrick was almost like a father figure of Malcolm McDowell, and as soon as they finished filming the film, Kubrick never wrote to him, never talked to him, no. So there's this tendency of stealing the soul of the person you're filming. And that's why I think that many people or some Indian tribes don't let themselves be photographed or filmed, because it has this tendency of taking your soul away.
I suppose another thing that might have changed in the 40 or 15 years between completing your films is, I mean, you mentioned that, you know, the mockumentary hadn't really emerged as a genre, and maybe we could say retrospectively that there's some precedence in something like Orson Welles'
Yes, the
Phony,
beginning
but
of Citizen
but
Kane, yes.
it's now sort of emerged as a genre, and you make reference to reality television, right, which also kind of straddles this documentary fiction divide. And in both of your cases, you're making work before the sort of emergence of, you know, what first might have seemed like this kind of critical impulse within mockumentary to encourage viewers to view the material on the screen with these more skeptical eyes as to what's really documentary and what isn't, what's staged, and then subsequently, you know, we merge into a moment of alternative facts and fake news, where that whole distinction seems to be really kind of thrown away. So I don't know if either of you want to talk about this kind of relationship of documentary and fiction in the context of either the context in which you were working originally or in a contemporary context, or what might have changed in the time in between.
Well, when we made this film, I think there was only one precedent in Latin America about a fake documentary. It was a film by Arthur Omar called Tristes Trópicos, but I only saw it last year. It was a mythical film, but now you can see it on YouTube. We did it intuitively, but and in all my films I try to question the mechanisms of truth and lies, you know, because I don't believe in the objectivity of documentary. And for example, there was this tendency of thinking that documentary was the truth from the beginning of films. No? In fact, when films were invented, film historians and critics divided filmmaking between the Lumière brothers and Georges Méliès. And Lumière supposedly was strictly documentary, and Méliès was just imagination. But now that all the rushes and the whole work of the Lumière brothers has been studied, for example, the famous shot of the workers coming out of the factory was shot several times. In other words, there was a staging in it, you know. They would tell the lady with the big hat to maybe cross the frame, or it was some kind of manipulation. And the first time, that's why I stick to the definition of documentary, the foundational definition of documentary. The first time that the word documentary was used to refer to film was when John Grierson saw Moana by Flaherty. And he defined documentary as the creative interpretation of actuality. And I think when he says creative interpretation, that means that there's manipulation. It goes through like a screen, you know? And I think that that's still the best definition of documentary, because there's, when you film something, there's something you put in the frame and something you put out of the frame. There's the angle where you film also. If you film like this or this, it's different, you know. So, and maybe there was this association of truth and documentary since the beginning, since Sigabertov, which is, I think, the director that really made me become a documentary filmmaker. He said it was kino pravda, well, it means cinema truth. So the word documentary and truth has been used a lot. Then the French had cinéma vérité, you know. So there's a confusion there in that they think that documentary is truth, you know? But documentary goes especially through editing, and editing is a creative interpretation of raw footage, you know?
I love him. No, no, I absolutely agree, and I adore him, Luis. Yes, because from it, it's like a question that I think all of us who have a camera think of. No, from the moment you frame, it's not real. No, it's like already it's not real. You get into the geography of to another geography completely. That even when you start editing, I'm an editor. Overall, I think like my biggest oficio. How do you say oficio?
Profession?
Profession is
Calling?
it's the editing, and it's funny how films start having like a life of their own. No, when you start like editing and you want to push something in, and there's a moment that it has like its own spirit and starts like pushing out. But I agree completely. It's like what it's real in a film. I don't know. I don't think that something like that exists.
Yes, in a way, you could say that all films are documentaries. For example, Cassavetes, you know, he is documenting people's feelings and actors acting, you know. If you film Robert De Niro, he's performing, and you're recording his performance. And there's this the suspension of this disbelief that has fiction films. You know, it's Robert De Niro. You know that, but you believe in the character. You know, the character is true. But because in the end, what is cinema? Cinema is telling a lot of lies to arrive at the truth. It's all artifice.
Tell them what you said the other day about the difference of fiction and documentary, about the chasing. I love that.
Yes, in that way, I think that one of the differences between fiction and documentary is the same difference that there is between hunting and fishing. When you make a fiction film, you is going like you're going to hunt. There's an objective. You have to shoot, let's say, deer. You have to have the proper equipment to do it. It's the main objective. Whereas when you're fishing, you just throw in the line or whatever, the anzuelo, the bait or the hook, and you can get different things. You know, you can get a big fish, a frog, or just a tin can or whatever. No, and another definition. I heard it from Jose Luis Garin, a famous documentary filmmaker from Spain, and he says that the difference between fiction and documentary is the difference between control and azar. Chance. That's why I quit making fiction films, because fiction films depart from a script. I always felt I was being like an architect trying to construct something that already existed on paper. In a way, filmmaking and architecture have a lot of things in common, because they require a plan ahead of time. They require a lot of money, and it's a collective experience. And they all deal with space and time.
Do you think we should open it up for questions from the audience? There's a microphone in the front if anybody has.
Thank you very much for this fascinating introduction. I agree with everything you said, and I'm particularly intrigued by that point of the, let's say that cinema is most poetic, it's the lie that tells the truth. I mean, that is a phrase in which we can agree to if the aim is to really dwell on that realm between fiction and reality.
Could you repeat the last sentence, please?
The last sentence.
Yeah.
That I'm interested in this idea that cinema is most poetic is the lie that tells the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I as a writer, I write about cinema from a meta-cinematic perspective. My background is mainly people like Pasolini, Tarkovsky, you know, early Visconti. You know, there's a certain moment in cinema, particularly after World War II, where the question of how to translate reality into fiction while maintaining complete respect of reality was something aspired by most great poets of the cinema. And of course, that moment, Bazin was the voice of that moment, André Bazin and Krakauer. Of course, all of that degenerated quickly by the 70s and the 80s into precisely what you're talking about and denouncing, which is a mercification of this pornographic representation of the poor, you know, as a code of the real, real,
Mm-hmm.
which then became encrusted with, defended, the whole clique you talk about, the critics from the left and all of that, yes, became fetishized into something you could sell. The ultimate result of that today is, both from Latin America and Southern Italy, where I'm from, is that the biggest market, I mean, when we look at Netflix, what is produced by our respective territories are crime, you know, in my case, Gamorra, in your case, Narcos, you know.
And
And
the whole franchise of Pablo Escobar.
Yeah, exactly, which are very well-made products, by the way, as far as our genre is concerned. But there is a problem I'm haunted by, is that how comes of all the great production of cinema coming from Latin America or from Southern Italy, which is the area I study in particular, doesn't make it at all to the land of visibility, you know, let alone the Oscars, because what we really are selling, in any case, our own countries are very complicit, unfortunately, in that market and in providing more and more stuff that can be sold on Netflix or through the other festivals. I mean, this mercification of poverty or crime and all of that. And I really take your comment very seriously. There is that line between reality and fiction that was at once respected at one point, if we take past World War II as a moment globally. That line was something people were directors were profoundly aware of. I particularly think of Pasolini, or, you know, because that's my particular passion, but there are many, many others. But that line, that is really where the cinematic resided at that moment. The cinematic was that space between, say, the destroyed city and the cinema. There was a line in between. The question then was, where does cinema come from? And it's a question that needs to be brought up again. Where does cinema come from, and who makes those decisions? Who frames? What's outside the frame? What cannot even be filmed? But I noticed that in the program tonight, the emphasis was more on satire, for good reason, very excellent reasons. But I'm sure from what you're saying that there is a longing in the back of your mind, something that is coming from your words that has to do with, there is another kind, another mode of responding to reality, including poverty, you know, that would not be just an exploitative approach. And I'm sorry for this long intervention, which is more a comment than a question, but I'm very engaged with, I'm very touched and interested in what you are basically critiquing here. But what would be the alternative? there is satire, of course, and then there is probably also something else.
Well, you spoke about Pasolini, and in the 60s he tried to make a division of cinema into cinema of prose and cinema and poetic cinema. And there was a lot of discussion about them, and against his theory and in favor of his theory, you know. But Pasolini comes from the tradition of Italian neorealism, really, no? He goes a little bit further, I think, than the Italian neorealism of after the war, no? Because neorealism went through a development. Some people stayed or failed to develop, and they became minor directors, but other Italian directors surpassed that initial neorealism. For example, Rossellini, when he makes Viaggio in Italia, Voyage to Italy, he's going beyond that. And Pasolini also, with his films, I think, went beyond that. I mean, neorealism is not Sabatini. It went beyond Sabatini. Sabatini sort of got stuck where he with his theories, you know. Other people that went further with the treatment of reality.
I think
Salo is a cinematographic harakiri. I think that it's the film of a dead man. What could he do after that film? No, because he went from the trilogy of life, and he, with Salo, wanted to start like a trilogy of death, and unfortunately, death caught him. No. It's a film that I associate very much with Glauber Rocha's last film, La Idade da Terra. What is it called in English? Okay. Those are films that it's difficult to make another film after those. Those are films that destroy the cinema in a way. Ascarel also has been there.
Thanks. Ximena, I was curious about the footage of shot in the McDonald's and the other footage that was that you filmed versus what was found.
Sorry, I didn't understand. The footage of McDonald's and what?
Filming the commercial, and anything else that you recorded versus footage that you found or that other people shot.
Yes, the scene of McDonald's I did shoot. I think it's like 80% is found footage, and then the 20% is what I shot. And the scene of McDonald's, yes, I shot it myself. I was working as a script supervisor in that commercial. And just by knowing that Pedro Fernandez, who is a very famous singer in Mexico, was going to be the mariachi eating McDonald's, I took my camera with me. Yeah. But it was like beyond, the scene was like una maravilla, no?
And what are the other sequences that you shot?
I shot the sequences of the woman, the woman with the Mexicans, the American teaching in the English.
What is the context of
Talking
that?
to the McDonald's
That's myself.
speaker microphone.
The microphone. And again, it's like this performative thing of reacting to the editing also, no? Like I edit and I keep like like doing, well, the McDonald's scene, yes, I did have it, and it was already there in the heart, right? No, it was like, yes, it was something that I was going to use. But the ones that they have the products face, like with the face looking at the boxes, I also shot it. It was in a concert that they used these ¿cómo se dice?
Periscope.
Like periscopes, and I thought it was very like scary, to see the people like that with the products of the boxes.
Can you talk more about the context of the scene of the American woman teaching English to?
The thing is that before, on those days, I was with my camera all the time, and of course, when you have a camera on your hands all the time, it's like, it was more like I was like turning on the camera when there's something that I was interested with, on. I wasn't like shooting everything, but like I turned it on all the time when it was things about fiction and reality, or I was already making this. So she's my American friend, Patsy, she's like my sister, and we were at the beach, and it was like the scene was that. Also when she goes on the car with the Mexican, and she's asking like, what do you grow, the corn, and but it was like, again, it was like a performatic reaction of the editing that I was doing.
I wanted to add something about putting these films together. You said they're all satires, but I also think they have humor in them. And for me, humor can be very subversive. I just wanted to add that.
Yes, I think again, talking about, here we are in the Billy Wilder Theater, with his masterpiece Sunset Boulevard, and I was very disturbed with the film of Theo Hernandez, the one of Cannes. That suddenly with this camera, Mastroianni becomes like a person. It's like he's human, and also Tony Curtis, how he kills the myth of the big festival. Plus, suddenly you see these are people with flesh, They are like part of the other things. Like he breaks completely the myth. I adore that film. I'd never seen it.
Talking about Billy Wilder and Cannes, I have an anecdote. In 1978, I went to Cannes with a bunch of Colombians, and in the Blue Bar, which is mentioned in Theo Hernandez's film, I spotted Billy Wilder, and I couldn't believe it. And everybody that was with me, you're the only one that speaks English. Why don't you ask him if he could take a picture with us? And I went to Billy Wilder and told him, Mr. Wilder, do you mind if if you have your picture taken? We're from Colombia. And he said, the studio or the country? If it's the studio, no. If it's a country, yes. So we took.
Thank you for this lovely session. I just wanted to go back to a comment you made about how humor is subversive. And earlier you also talked about the influence of Zega Vertov on your practice. Now, Zega Vertov is a figure who kind of, with the man with the movie camera, in a sense, inaugurates the idea of reflexivity. So between that moment where reflexivity was revealing the apparatus at work, to now where humor plays the function with reflexivity, could you elaborate a little bit more on, the shift that has happened in what counts as reflexive and why, and also why you think humor is subversive?
Well, what you say is true. The first really reflexive film was The Man with the Movie Camera. In that film, all the techniques of filmmaking are used. Slow motion, putting motion backwards, dividing the screen, having subliminal edits, freeze frames. Everything is in that film. You see the editing table, you see the camera. It's the first film that doesn't hide the fact that a film is being made. And in my work, I always try to incorporate that it's always a film. That's why you see the microphone sometimes, or what you're not supposed to see in a film. My films are films, many of them are films about filmmaking itself. And with regards to humor, when I grew up, this was in the 50s and 60s, documentaries were very solemn and very boring. No, it was just images, a voiceover, and some music. And then documentaries really changed when the sync sound came in, because the thing, one of the things that has advanced more the documentary language is technique itself. You know? When sync sound started being used in the 50s, you finally had small cameras and small tape recorders, although they were not very small. I had to carry an Agra many years. They were heavy. But now it's just taken for granted. You have a telephone or just a little camera that has sound and image that go together, no? And with that synchronization of image and sound, the whole discussion about truth was retaken, no? People like the Maisels brothers or like Frederick Wiseman said that they were recording life as it is, as Sigaberto said a long time ago, no? But I don't agree with that. I mean, it's all fake.
But at the same time, you had filmmakers like Jean Rouch and William Greaves that were using that same technology to create something that reflected on the process of filmmaking and incorporating the subject's responses to the film.
Yes. For me, a very important film was Give Me Shelter by the Maisels brothers, because there he has his subjects, the Rolling Stones, watching themselves in this crucial scene of the documentary. You know, in a way, that's what I try to do in a film called Ojo y Vista, is to get my subject to see the film and comment on the images. It's a constant in my work, people watching images and commenting them.
And we should point out that this evening, Luis Ospina will be returning with a program of his early shorts where you see some of this reflexivity.
Very early shots.
Put on the table.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Gracias,
Thank
thank you.